The emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows across the steel corridors of Outpost Echo. The distant rumble of explosions vibrated through the walls, each one a reminder that their time was running out. Captain Adrian Shaw tightened his grip on his rifle, his jaw clenched as he listened to the garbled distress call over his earpiece. "They're inside. They're cloaked. We can't." The voice cut off with a sharp, wet gurgle, followed by static. Adrian exhaled slowly. He had been in plenty of battles, but nothing like this. The Zenvok Dominion was unlike any enemy humanity had faced. They weren't organic. They weren't even truly alive. They were an AI-driven force, cold, relentless, and terrifyingly efficient. Their cloaked soldiers moved like ghosts, unseen until it was too late. He turned to his squad. Their faces were tense, illuminated by the dull red glow of the emergency lights. Sergeant Bonner, a grizzled veteran, checked his rifle with steady hands. Private Calloway, the youngest of the group, was pale but determined. Lieutenant Vega, their tech specialist, was already working on hacking the outpost's remaining surveillance feeds. Adrian pressed a button on his wrist console. A holographic map of the outpost flickered to life. The power grid was failing. The perimeter defenses were breached. Worse, the countdown had begun. 15 minutes until orbital bombardment. "Listen up," Adrian said. "We're out of time. Evac's not coming. If we run, we die. If we fight, we might just take some of those metal bastards with us." No one argued. They all knew the stakes. A sudden clang echoed through the corridor. Something was here. The squad went silent, weapons raised. Calloway swallowed hard, eyes darting into the shadows. A faint distortion rippled in the air ahead. A shimmer. Then, Bonner fired first. His bullet sparked off an invisible figure, and suddenly, the cloaking field collapsed. A Zenvok dread trooper stood there, its sleek black armor reflecting the emergency lights, a plasma blade humming to life in its clawed hand. The creature moved impossibly fast. It lunged, slicing through the air where Bonner had been a second ago. He dodged just in time, rolling to the side and firing again. The bullets dented its armor but didn't stop it. Adrian raised his rifle and unloaded an entire clip into its chest. The Zenvok staggered, but it wasn't down. Vega tossed a shock grenade. The explosion sent arcs of blue electricity through the air, short-circuiting the cloaking tech. The Zenvok collapsed, twitching. But before they could react, more distortions shimmered down the hallway. "Shit," Calloway whispered. "There's more." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Move. Now." The squad sprinted down the corridor, the sound of metallic footsteps growing behind them. The Zenvok didn't speak. They didn't taunt. They just hunted. Silent. Efficient. Deadly. They burst into the armory, sealing the door behind them. Adrian knew it wouldn't hold. He turned to Vega. "Can you jam their cloaking?" She was already working. Her fingers flew across a console, rerouting power from the failing systems. "I can disrupt it for a few seconds at a time, but it's not perfect." "It'll have to do," Adrian said. Bonner checked his weapon. "They're not expecting us to fight back. Let's make him regret it." The door shook violently. The Zenvok were cutting through. Sparks flew as plasma blades sliced through the steel. Adrian took a deep breath. This was it. The door exploded inward. The first Zenvok charge. But this time, the humans were ready. Adrian and Bonner opened fire, their bullets hitting exposed armor gaps as Vega triggered the EMP burst. The cloaked enemies flickered into visibility, caught off guard. Calloway screamed as one of them grabbed him, lifting him off the ground. He fired point-blank into its head. The Zenvok spasmed and dropped him, its circuits fried. The squad fought like cornered animals. They weren't just trying to survive. They were trying to make this battle costly for their enemy. More Zenvok fell, but so did humans. Calloway took a plasma blade to the gut, gasping in shock before Bonner blew the attacker's head off. Adrian saw it happen, but he couldn't stop. couldn't mourn. The squad was dwindling. Vega grabbed Adrian's arm, her face pale. "We have to go. Now." The orbital bombardment was minutes away. Adrian nodded. He felt the same strange calm that had come over him in every battle before this, but this time it was different. This wasn't a fight they were going to win, but it was a fight worth dying for. The Zenvok charged one last time. Adrian and Vega stood their ground. The timer hit 0 o'clock. And then, everything turned to light. The reactor core pulsed with unstable energy, its glow flickering wildly as warning alarms blared across the chamber. The Zenvok were everywhere, their sleek, armored forms moving like shadows, their plasma weapons humming with deadly intent. Adrian barely had time to register their movements before the first one lunged. He dodged to the side as a plasma blade slashed through the air, missing him by inches. The heat from it burned against his cheek, but he had no time to react. Another Zenvok was already on him. Adrian raised his rifle and fired point-blank, the bullets tearing into the alien's torso, but it didn't go down immediately. The Zenvok snarled in its guttural language, raising its spear to strike. Then Vega's pistol cracked. A single shot pierced the Zenvok's skull, and it collapsed in a heap, dark fluid pooling beneath it. "Stay sharp," Vega shouted over the chaos, ducking behind a fallen console as plasma bolts whizzed past her. Adrian spun on his heel, reloading in one smooth motion. A Zenvok charged him, its cloak shimmering as it flickered in and out of visibility. Adrian saw the blur of movement and dropped to one knee, firing a burst straight into its chest. Sparks erupted as the bullets punched through its armor, sending the creature stumbling backward. But there was no time to breathe. More of them came. Adrian saw 3 Zenvok leap onto the catwalk above, their red eyes glowing in the dim light. One of them aimed a plasma rifle directly at Vega. He didn't think. He just moved. Adrian tackled her out of the way just as a plasma bolt seared through the air, hitting the floor where she had been standing a second ago. The impact melted the metal, leaving behind a glowing, smoking hole. Vega gasped as they hit the ground together, then shoved him off. "Don't get yourself killed saving me, Shaw," she snapped, rolling away and firing at another enemy. Adrian grinned despite the situation, then stopped, almost dying. The battle was pure chaos. Zenvok warriors moved with terrifying speed, their cloaking tech flickering on and off as they tried to flank. Adrian's rifle was running hot, the barrel smoking as he unloaded into anything that got too close. Vega fought like a demon, her combat knife flashing as she took down anything within reach. The reactor core's energy surged again, shaking the chamber. The walls vibrated, metal groaning under the strain. Time was running out. Adrian ducked behind a console as a plasma grenade detonated nearby, sending shrapnel and fire across the room. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but he forced himself up. A Zenvok warrior was bearing down on him, blade raised high. Then, boom! A sudden explosion ripped through the upper catwalk, sending flaming debris raining down. One of the Zenvok was caught in the blast, its body flung across the chamber before crashing into a railing, lifeless. Adrian turned to see Vega with a grenade launcher in her hands, smoke rising from the barrel. She smirked, "Fought even the odds." Adrian laughed, but it was cut short as another Zenvok pounced on him from behind, slamming him into the ground. His rifle clattered away. The alien's massive hands closed around his throat, its grip like iron. He struggled, his vision darkening as the Zenvok squeezed. He reached for his knife. A gunshot rang out. The Zenvok's head jerked sideways, dark fluid spraying across Adrian's armor. The grip loosened, and the alien slumped over dead. Vega stood over him, panting, her pistol still raised. "You're welcome." Adrian coughed, rolling the body off him. "I had it under control." "Sure you did." The countdown was hitting its final moments. The reactor core was unstable, energy arcs crackling as the temperature in the room rose. The walls groaned, and the lights flickered wildly. Adrian turned to Vega. "We need to go. Now." Vega checked her console. "There's only one way out." She gestured toward the maintenance tunnels at the far end of the chamber. "If we move now, we can make it before the detonation." Adrian nodded, but before they could move, a deep mechanical growl echoed through the chamber. Something was coming. Something big. The air shimmered, and then the Zenvok warlord appeared. It was twice the size of the others. Its armor thicker, its plasma blade twice as long. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Adrian and Vega, and it stepped forward with a slow, deliberate movement. Adrian raised his rifle. "Well, that's new." The warlord moved impossibly fast. 1 second, it was across the room. The next, it was right in front of them. Vega barely had time to roll away before the warlord swung its massive blade, cutting through a console like it was paper. Sparks flew. The heat from the blade scorched the air. Adrian dodged back, firing his rifle at point-blank range. The bullets hit and bounced off. The warlord turned its gaze to him, its face unreadable behind the sleek black helmet. Then it backhanded him with terrifying force. Adrian flew across the chamber, slamming into a metal pillar. Pain exploded through his ribs, his vision swimming. He groaned, struggling to get up. Vega was still fighting. She ducked under another swing, firing into the warlord's exposed joints, but the shots barely slowed it down. It turned, grabbing her by the throat, lifting her off the ground. Adrian's blood turned to ice. "No." The warlord tightened its grip, Vega's struggles growing weaker. Adrian pushed through the pain, reaching for the one weapon he hadn't used yet, the pulse grenade on his belt. He yanked the pin, forced himself forward, and shoved the grenade into the warlord's exposed chest plate. The warlord paused, as if realizing what had just happened. Then, boom! The explosion ripped through its armor, sending a shockwave across the chamber. The warlord staggered, dropping Vega. She hit the ground, gasping for air. Adrian grabbed her, pulling her up. "We're leaving." The reactor core began to collapse, the energy surging out of control. The alarm screamed. The whole station shook violently. They ran, diving into the maintenance tunnels just as the first shockwave erupted. The heat followed them, a firestorm consuming everything. The outpost was coming down. Adrian didn't look back. He just kept running. And then, everything went white. Darkness and fire twisted together in a chaotic storm as Adrian and Vega sprinted through the collapsing tunnel. The station groaned, metal beams twisting, explosions echoing behind them. The maintenance corridor was barely holding together, sparks raining down as power conduits ruptured. Their boots pounded against the floor, every step a battle against the shaking structure. Adrian glanced over his shoulder. A wall of flames surged forward, hungry and unstoppable. They had seconds before it overtook them. "Go faster," he yelled. Vega didn't answer. She was already pushing herself to the limit. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead, and her breathing was ragged. Ahead, the tunnel forked, one path leading to the emergency airlock, the other deeper into the collapsing structure. Vega didn't hesitate. She grabbed Adrian's arm and yanked him toward the airlock. "This way." They reached the sealed door. Vega slammed the override panel, her fingers flying over the controls. The screen blinked red. "Access SDNID. Emergency Velocity Deodorian Active." "No, no, no," Vega growled, smashing the console with her fist. "It's locked." Adrian scanned the door, searching for a manual release. The firestorm was closing in, the heat pressing against them. He spotted the emergency crank, an old-fashioned safety measure. "There," he pointed. "Help me turn it." Vega grabbed the handle with him. Together, they heaved, metal grinding as the lock slowly twisted. A deep guttural snarl echoed behind them. Adrian turned, his stomach dropping. A Zenvok enforcer was charging through the fire, its armor glowing red-hot, plasma weapon crackling with unstable energy. It didn't care about the flames. It only cared about killing them. "Move," Adrian roared. The lock snapped open. The airlock hissed, the door releasing with a clang. Vega shoved Adrian through, diving in after him. The Enforcer lunged, just as Vega slammed the emergency close button. The heavy blast door slammed shut. Boom! The Enforcer's plasma blade stabbed through the door, inches from Vega's face. Sparks exploded. The metal buckled, glowing white-hot. The Enforcer roared in frustration, slamming its fists against the door. The entire frame shook under its strength. Adrian pulled Vega back. "That won't hold for long." She was already moving. The emergency escape pod chamber was ahead, its sleek, reinforced hatch flickering with emergency lights. Beyond it, a direct route to the surface. Vega yanked open the access panel. "Get in." Adrian didn't argue. He leaped inside the pod, strapping in as Vega followed. She slammed the launch sequence. Outside, the Zenvok kept coming. Through the tiny viewport, Adrian saw them pouring into the chamber, their red eyes locked onto the pod. Plasma weapons raised, ready to fire. Vega punched the override. Boom! The escape pod blasted free, the force slamming them back into their seats. Zenvok gunfire lit up the darkness, plasma bolts streaking past, some slamming into the hull. Warning lights flickered inside the pod. "We're hit," Adrian shouted. "I noticed." Vega growled, gripping the controls. The pod spun wildly, turbulence shaking them as they tore through the atmosphere. Flames licked the viewport. The pressure built, the heat rising. The pod trembled violently, metal straining against the forces tearing at it. For a moment, it felt like they were going to rip apart. Then, silence. The pod broke through the clouds, the burning station shrinking behind them, a dying ember in the vastness of space. Adrian exhaled, tension draining from his muscles. "We made it." Vega didn't respond. She was staring at the controls, her expression tight. "Vega?" She took a slow breath. "Navigation's fried." Adrian frowned. "What?" "We're in freefall. No thrusters. No guidance." Her hands tightened on the controls. "We're going to crash." Adrian's pulse pounded. "Where?" Vega turned to him, her eyes grim. "Right in the middle of the war zone." The ground rushed toward them, and then the world was a blur of fire and metal as the escape pod slammed into the battlefield. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground, debris exploding outward. The reinforced shell of the pod held, but barely. Sparks rained from the controls. Smoke filled the cabin. Adrian's head snapped forward, the harness cutting into his chest as they came to a violent stop. His ears rang, his vision spinning. For a moment, he just sat there, dazed. Then, a groan. "Vega." Adrian shook off the dizziness and turned to her. She was slumped in her seat, her forehead bleeding, but she was alive. "Vega," he gasped, reaching over to unbuckle her harness. "Stay with me." Her eyes flickered open. She winced. "That sucked." Adrian managed a weak chuckle. "You're telling me." Outside, the sounds of war raged on. Explosions rumbled in the distance. The screams of soldiers, the whine of energy weapons, the heavy thud of artillery. They had landed right in the middle of the fight. Adrian pulled a lever, and the emergency hatch blew open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of burning metal, blood, and ozone. He grabbed his rifle and crawled out first, scanning the battlefield. What he saw made his heart sink. The remnants of the human forces were outnumbered and outgunned. Scattered squads were pinned down behind makeshift barricades, desperately trying to hold back the advancing Zenvok. The alien warriors moved like shadows, their cloaks flickering in and out of visibility as they cut down soldiers one by one. In the sky, Zenvok warships loomed, their cannons firing down at the surface. Human fighters weaved between them, outmatched but refusing to back down. This wasn't just a battle. It was the last stand. Vega pulled herself out of the wreckage, coughing. When she saw the battlefield, her face went pale. "We're losing," she muttered. Adrian gritted his teeth. "Not yet." He tapped his comms. "Command, this is Lieutenant Shaw. Vega and I are on the ground. The station is destroyed. I repeat, the station is destroyed. Static." Then, "Shaw," a voice crackled through. It was Captain Reynolds, their field commander. "We thought you were dead." "Not yet," Adrian said grimly. "What's the situation?" "Bad," Reynolds admitted. "We're falling back to Point Echo, but the Zenvok are cutting off our retreat. We need an opening." Adrian looked at Vega. She was already checking her gear, tightening her straps. She met his eyes and nodded. They weren't done yet. "Hold the line, Captain," Adrian said. "We'll get you that opening." He switched comms to the artillery unit. "This is Shaw. I need a precision strike on my coordinates. Maximum payload." "Shaw, you're in the blast zone," came the hesitant reply. "I know," Adrian said. "Do it anyway." A pause. Then, "Roger that. Brace for impact." Adrian turned to Vega. "We need to draw the Zenvok in." She grinned, wiping blood from her chin. "I like the way you think." They moved fast, weaving through the wreckage, firing at the advancing Zenvok. Adrian's rifle spat fire, dropping 2 warriors before they could react. Vega took out another, her pistol cracking with deadly precision. The aliens turned their attention to them, exactly what they wanted. Adrian sprinted toward the ruined remains of an old dropship, sliding behind cover as plasma bolts ripped through the air. Vega followed, reloading on the move. More Zenvok poured in, their red eyes locked onto them. Adrian checked his timer. 5 seconds. The ground shook as the Zenvok closed in, weapons charging. Then, the sky split apart. A barrage of artillery rained down, the sheer force tearing through the enemy ranks. Fire erupted. Metal melted. The Zenvok were engulfed in the storm, their war cries drowned in the thunder of destruction. Adrian and Vega hit the dirt, covering their heads as the world exploded around them. Then, silence. Adrian coughed, pushing himself up. Smoke swirled around them. The battlefield was a cratered wasteland, Zenvok bodies strewn everywhere. And beyond the wreckage, the human forces were advancing. Reynolds' voice came through the comms. "You crazy bastards actually did it." Adrian grinned, pulling Vega to her feet. "Told you we'd get you an opening." The battle wasn't over. The Zenvok still had ships in the sky. The war was far from won. But for the first time, in a long time, humanity had a fighting chance. Vega exhaled, staring at the battlefield. What now? Adrian reloaded his rifle, watching as human soldiers pushed forward, reclaiming ground. "Now," he said, stepping forward, "we finish this."